Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify, the fast, lean learning machine, the fastest learning, most revenue-generating personalization platform for e-commerce.
Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, and I hope you're all very well today. As always, I like to start with a little story about my experience on the front line of brand experience on the other side of the coin. Sadly, today I have to add. So you might know the company called, I think it's Companas, German company, which I bought basically a pruner from Lidl a couple of months ago. Used it once, awesome actually, worked really, really well, good price, everything else. Stuck it in the shed thinking, it's a long thing, so I'm not going to lie it flat on the floor. And then about a month later, I went back to use it again, and the whole thing was just covered in oil. So there'd been some sort of leak, and it had gone right down to the battery, drenched it, and obviously I tried to start it, and it's a non-starter. So I thought, well, that's a bit out of order because I'm a normal consumer. I checked the instructions. There was nothing about you have to empty the oil chamber or lie it flat, otherwise it's going to break and be completely rendered useless. So I thought it's a bit out of order. So I basically contacted Lidl support, who were reasonably all right, and they said, look, we're going to have to forward this to the supplier. Anyway, long story short, supplier eventually gets back to me, totally useless. Just got back and said, basically, your unit was bought in 2019. I'm like, what? And basically, you've got to buy a new battery. So I kind of got back and said, well, that's the wrong, unit. The IAN, they call it, was the wrong one. I gave them the new one. I said, look, I'm ex-Trustpilot. I tried to touch a few levers here, right? So I said, I'm ex-Trustpilot. I've just gone to your profile. It's horrendous. It's just poor. And I kind of told them a little story about, that this is an opportunity if you have a poor profile, that if you've got bad reviews, you can make somebody really unhappy, ecstatic by, really helping them out. So why don't you do that? And then I did my bit of my sales stalking skills and got hold of Hans Peter, general manager, and stuck him on the email thread as well. Anyway, no point doing that. The guy got back to me again, just said, yeah, really interesting information. I gave you my response already, so buy a battery. And that was it. So I thought, great, that's kind of the other side of the coin about brand loyalty from my perspective. That's not a good experience, and that I'm really upset now. I want to try and log a complaint. I'll probably try and go back to Lidl, try and escalate it, but who am I? But anyway, my point on all this is, if anyone out there is listening, has got a spare battery to a Companas pruner, who knows anybody high up in Lidl who can sort of show me a favor, give me a shout. Anyway, so that's enough of that. But so these podcasts are always about striving to bring thought leadership to the e-commerce community. And this time around, I've got a really, really interesting guy called David Williams. Now, David is a very seasoned, very experienced e-commerce leader with over 20 years experience. And he's worked with some great brands, including Bertelsmann, Charles Tyrwhitt, Bowers & Wilkins. And most recently, he was at Deckers, where amongst a number of amazing things he did there, he started up the UGG brand online and grew it to 50 million. He I didn't actually ask David this, but is it Hoka or Hoka?
Hoka. Hello, everyone. Hoka Oni Oni.
Yeah. Hoka Oni Oni.
Hawaiian.
Okay. In Japan, is it right?
So Hoka Oni Oni is one of the fastest running shoe brands at the moment. It grew up in the mountains. It was around trail running. So I launched it in Europe, and it's been vastly successful there again.
Awesome. Okay. And then also, yeah. And then you were saying about the DTC estate for Europe, so running both e-commerce and retail for that as well, which is amazing. But I was just going to say that you're now working on your own right at the moment, helping brands as a kind of a consultant for brands including New Look, Hawes & Curtis, and then most recently Aspinall of London. So welcome, David. Let me do it officially for you.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Hello. Yeah, thank you for inviting me on this.
Hey, not at all. Just to start off, obviously, what I was saying in the beginning there, some amazing achievements you've done. just to start us all off, why don't you tell us kind of how you got into e-commerce?
Right. I like the way you use the word seasoned. I think I probably said I was seasoned, but yeah, I've been doing it for 20 years. It wasn't even called e-commerce when I started working
Yeah,
on the internet as it was then.
yeah,
So I mean,
yeah.
I started many years ago in publishing. So I was a project editor
Mm,
for a company called Dawn and Kindersley,
mm,
another company called Pavilion after that. So I was basically project editing, and project managing book releases. So it was a very different world then. I think obviously at
yeah,
that time we started the business obviously on the sales side of it. Once we finished the books and they got printed and everything, they were selling to this company called
mm.
Amazon. And I'm like, who are these guys? And I started buying my
Wow.
books from them, and you could just
Yeah.
sense at that time Amazon,
Mm,
Bol.com. There's a few of these companies online that were selling those in music, and I was
mm,
like, this
mm.
is the way forward. It's
Yeah.
And I decided to move across. So the obvious thing for me again there was to move into start looking at jobs for companies where they were selling
Yeah.
books and that sort of thing online. So I moved to Bertelsmann, a company called BCA that they owned,
Yeah.
which was basically book clubs online. So selling,
Mm,
much more curated collections and selling books, driving the trading of that and the content that was needed
mm,
around that to
mm.
entice people to stay on the website rather than
Yeah.
just use the catalog. So
Uh,
that was quite a long time ago. Yeah, that's where I started. So
absolutely.
it
It's
was one of
amazing.
those sideways moves. So that not one of those people who just
Yeah.
went straight into e-commerce. We all started
Yeah.
somewhere where there
Yeah.
was.
Absolutely. But it's interesting that you kind of smelt it out. You were there at the
Yeah,
beginning and you saw that starting to take off and you thought, hold on a minute. And then you got on it, and then
yeah,
obviously 20 years later, you've worked with some incredible brands, must have accrued some amazing experience. I mean, in terms of just an overarching theme for this chat for the guys to understand, what we're sort of diving into today is really what the shape, if you like, of online retail is going to look like by the end, or however long it goes on. I mean, obviously the landscape is changing with what's going on at the moment. And so what the shape of it's going to look like at the end, in inverted commas, and also then how to prepare for it, and even lean on perhaps some predictions that you're formulating, David, in terms of your current experience and where you think things might go. So why don't you sort of start off by getting out your crystal ball that you've got by your side there, and tell us how you think e-commerce is going to kind of end up once stroke if things stabilize in the future at some point.
sure, yeah, sure. Thanks, Phil. I mean, currently at the moment, having said you said doing some consulting or interim director roles, it allows you really to
Yeah.
spend a bit of time looking at the market more holistically. You're not
Yeah.
completely pulled into the here and now of what a lot of people who will
No.
listen to this will be doing is going through it. So it allows you
Yeah.
just to look at things and be a bit of a
Yeah.
Nostradamus. And also there's an element of the experience you have there. So I think there are three key areas. There are three things that I think are going to happen um,
Yeah.
and are happening right now. And if you just need to look at internet retailing or other
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
drapers or whatever to see
Hmm.
what's happening. But I
Yeah.
think three
Yeah.
things are going to continue happening. So I think the first thing is I think we're all seeing that pure play businesses are going to continue to do well. The ones that are the big boys.
Mm.
I mean, they will continue to focus and do well because they haven't had to worry about another channel. Um, they haven't had
Yeah.
the interruptions. I think they've had some interruptions, sure,
Yeah.
from a supply chain perspective and everything else that's happening, but
Yeah.
and maybe managing
Yeah.
what they sell. But they've
Yeah.
all been growing and they
Yeah.
keep growing.
Mm. Mm.
You see what's happening
Mm.
outside of the other current struggles Boohoo's having, but it's been growing exponentially. This morning, ASOS was
Yeah.
growing,
Yeah.
and Amazon. I think they're going to
Yeah.
continue to grow.
Absolutely. Mm.
I think that's inevitable, and especially we'll talk later about online marketplaces. Equally, I think
Mm.
this is a real massive shift for retailers, and that's where I think where the biggest shift's going to be. Whether you're a
Mm-hmm.
direct brand or ones that sell other brands, I think that's where the the tectonic plate shift is happening there. From a full
Mm.
to this environment right now. If you're a retailer that
Mm.
has 200 stores that you were thinking probably
Yeah.
about closing some anyway because of what was happening anyway, it's been
Mm.
accelerated within
Mm.
3 years into 3 months. And so
Mm.
at the end of this, they're going to be retailers that are 80% offline, 20% online that buy natural movement to online mixed with store closures, which is horrible for everyone involved, they're going to be more 50-50. So that's going to be a complete shift in their business models, I think, for a lot of these companies, and you're seeing it already. I think, and I think that, and that's going to result also in the high street as we know it will be gone. So there's going to be all kinds of different shifts around that. You're seeing, every week we're hearing of administration's redundancies, and it's not great. And then the final thing is that we're also seeing, it was an amazing stat recently that, which was B2B going direct to consumer because they've had to drive revenue. And I think that's going to happen more. I think it was 85,000 retailers in the last 2-3 months in the UK who didn't have a website and now put one live. That's a massive shift in the landscape of what we're going to see. So I think those are the areas. That's what it's going to be, and it's going to mean that the businesses are shaped differently. The players are going to be different in the market, and how that integrates offline is going to be different.
Yeah, no, completely. So, I mean, one of the things we mentioned earlier before we started was that this kind of odd saying, well, it's not really an odd saying, but it's potentially a confusing saying about, there's a lot of talk of doubling down on digital. What exactly is that doubling down referring to, do you think? And what should retailers then be doing in the light of what you've kind of said?
Yeah, I don't really like the phrase. I think it's just because it alliterates and sounds it's quite good business speak, isn't it? Doubling down on digital. I think and recent companies that have already been doing it, like Nike have been saying it, and they're right. They have been focusing a lot on their digital experiences, but it's really doubling down on digital. What does it mean? It's immediately you think of spend, but I don't think it's that. I think it's about digital transformation. I think it's I think it's giving more focus to digital rather than letting it just run. And I do think it's technology and data. I think it's just there is a digital transformation piece that a lot of companies now have to go through and are already going through. I think it's not going to be just doubling on your marketing spend, because that's not going to do it, and or doubling your technology if you don't have the right people to run it. So I think it's all three. If you're going to double down on digital, it's got to be around it's embracing digital across the business. So breaking down the silos that are there, that we all know are there. Going back to retailers, I mentioned earlier, are used to, say a merchandiser or buying team used to buying for stores and store turns and stock turns. They're going to have to be different about how they look at things and be more agile, for example. Much more focus on inventory management than there has previously, I think, for example, just embracing ways of doing things differently. And customer service, for example, is another area where sometimes it can be a bit siloed. The other thing I think from doubling down, in my view, longer term, and I hope this isn't people throwing baby out with the bathwater, but is if you're doubling down on digital, you've got some really good people that you might be thinking about making redundant. People might be made redundant that could be really useful in that digital world. So I think that's the doubling down for me also, is how do you pull the people with that retail experience, the people who know the product, and repurpose them within the business somewhere. I think that's a really good opportunity that I hope some retailers are looking at, because when I was running direct to consumer for the UGG brand in Europe, it was really clear that the passion and the knowledge in season that sat with those store managers and their teams is very hard to replicate online when someone's for all your customer data platforms, for all your your hot jars and your session cams and your user experience technologies, you just can't get that last mile on there. And I think there's opportunities here that I think the right people will think about how the job structures and what they have will change. So I think it's doubling down on people, I think, at the right time. And the subject to cash, the processes that need to be shifted to be digital, and the technology that you have in place, is it good enough? Do you understand enough about your customer?
No, it's interesting. One of the things, I know we were talking another time about this as well, is that I'm quite intrigued about what you're talking about around this last mile thing. So I understand that when you go into a shop and you've got that, like you said, the final mile. It might be, let's say, I don't know, I'm going in to get some shoes for my kid. He's going to school, he's going to get fitted. He can have that whole kind of tangible thing that's going on, and in that moment. That's just one example, but I know there's hundreds of others. How, in your experience, and not talking about the staffing and so on as well around that. How on earth do you actually transfer that to an online presence? Like, how do you
It's
do that?
it's I think you have to start with, I think it's virtually impossible to do it. That's why I still believe in retail, that you still have, at the end of the day, your retail will still always have a place. It's not going to go away. You're going to want to, if you've really got questions about it, you need to do that. But I guess where I'd say is, most of that decision point is around the product page. Are you getting all the information you need there from there? What do you need to do there? Can you repurpose store staff to be, they know the product well. Maybe they can be repurposed to answer consumer questions in that at that point, whether it's through a live chat or whatever. Bringing that, be able to interact with the customer there. The other
Whole
side of
FAQ
things you're
thing
seeing,
is massive, isn't it?
the other thing
For
you're seeing at the
example.
moment is video consultations. I think I saw today, was it John Lewis? But obviously there are companies like Vashi that do that. You can have personalized shopping experiences through the website. There are things there, that innovations that are going to come along around that. That help. But where I probably saw at Deckers and things like, where we were trying to bring things, was just the interactions between certainly in selling season. What are you seeing in there? What products are fitting or not fitting? We used to do a fit testing in store every Wednesday, and feed back the information with the online trading team, so they would update the website, merchandise it better, update the product information. So you're not working just in this siloed, static way of working. It's just being a bit more dynamic and agile around those sorts of things. But it's tough.
That makes a lot of sense. No, sure. So you were saying about how you're getting the retail experience, and when we say retail, we're talking about the bricks and mortar experience. But then like you say, you're breaking down that silo, and you're really effectively communicating between what the front line is experiencing, if you like, with real people, and then basically transferring that back into the online experience as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think so. And I think always going to be, at some point, what's the process for bigger companies getting those some of those store associates who might want to break into online to work in the trading team or something. There's this online trading teams, for example, but category management there. It's often it's an obvious route to me to maintain and keep people who have great knowledge in the business.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, like you say, in terms of trying to preserve redundancies, and also obviously grow the business and keep costs down. I'm assuming, possibly wrongly, but I'm no expert in it. But if you've got a lot of overhead going out on your bricks and mortar, and then you're going to have to close that down, then I'm assuming that might free up quite a lot of potential capital for other areas, in terms of expanding the digital side of things, maybe to other geographies, other territories, or whatever, and then utilize those staff members in those operations. And I mean, I know there's, in terms of cost point, depending on what platform you're already on or how big the company is, there's, I suppose, a plethora of options there in terms of budget to get out there across brand new channels and take advantage of that. No, that's interesting. Very interesting. So you mentioned a little bit earlier on around B2B companies and them moving towards a direct-to-consumer DTC model. Obviously, I think we were talking about the PG Tips, or whichever that one that was, started doing it directly. Baked Beans, I think, has been mentioned as well, and stuff. And obviously, like from the beginning, I mean, there's an interesting thing where years and years ago, I remember Apple doing it, and it was almost like the first one that I can remember that had this really massive conflict. And when the news came out that Apple was selling through resellers and also going direct, there was this big kind of, it blew up, and everyone was thinking that's weird, that don't work. So I mean, do you think, I don't know much about it, obviously we've seen the Apple model kind of work to a degree. I don't actually know, but I mean, asking you the question of, do you think ultimately that the idea of B2B companies going DTC is going to actually end the idea of the multi-brand retail partner, or can they sit side by side, or you know what I mean? What's your thoughts around all that?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked, majority of my long seasoned online career, I've worked in companies that have a very big actually were virtually completely wholesale,
Yeah.
and obviously have made that shift across. So I
Hmm.
think to
Yeah.
having more of a D2C presence. So I mean, and as you mentioned, Apple also, companies that said like Nike and have been very clear about their desire to not sell. And then recently it was mentioned about their selling to Amazon as well. That there again they were trying to stop it.
Yeah.
So I still think, I think the shift's already been happening. I think to an extent.
Yeah.
But okay, I'll ask the question first. Do I think it'll accelerate the end of multi-brand retail partners? No, not at all. I think there's
No.
always a need for your brand to be positioned against other brands, for you to utilize the right retail partners to sell. So I think
Hmm.
I think they'll always have the volume. Most of them, if you're selling PG chips, you're not going to stop selling to Sainsbury's and Tesco's. That would be insane.
Yeah.
But you might have
Yeah.
a different type of
Yeah.
customer who loves PG tips and wants a subscription. I don't know. So it won't,
Yeah.
it won't accelerate the end of it. But I think that, as I said, I think that kind
Yeah.
of multi-brand retail partner mix will shift. It's already been happening in the last 10 years with brands.
Yeah.
What's been happening? I was growing very much as the direct consumer arm was growing a lot more in tandem with those partners. But it did mean some inevitable channel shift and channel conflict. That's never going to go away. But I think it's
No.
what it's going to do and accelerate it is, I think some companies will be looking at much more significantly. They're looking at their existing partner base and their online offering and
Yeah.
work thinking what they're going to do. The other thing that's going to happen, I think, a lot more with what's been happening in retail and with the pure play growth and retail is,
Mhm.
I think you'll see a doubling down more on online marketplaces and online concessions will grow in those areas. So there'll still be multi-brand retail partners, but there will be marketplace relationships. Um, I think what's really happening, what
Yeah.
Deckers did really well was you clean up your base and you look at your key partners. So you work out who
Mm.
are the key partners that you need to get your new
Yeah.
customers through. So
Yeah.
most of which are pure play and generally tend to be the bigger guys. Um, that said, I think the other thing we're going to
Yeah.
see, if I mentioned earlier, is I think local.
Mhm.
I think I don't know if maybe because I said that live out in the sticks, but there seems to be another whether it's a last breath or a resurgence
Yeah.
of local sellers. So I think you might find um, that there'll be an increase in there'll be probably the really big boys and some of the smaller businesses, if they survive, will start. So say you've got a local sports shop that's got 5 shops in the local area. I think they seem to be doing really well at the moment from a local perspective. That might keep growing.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think you'll see an inevitable shift, an increase in the size of the direct to consumer business, but
Yeah.
I think it'll level out at some point. I think the multi-brand retail partners will
Okay.
consolidate and be very important
Yeah.
moving forward.
Interesting. Okay.
Um,
So what you're saying is they're not going to kind of die. Obviously, there is
uh,
room, but the multi-brand retail part, like you're saying, is going to be more savvy, and they're almost like any other kind of almost like a channel
yeah,
operation, right? You
yeah,
can't affect you have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You have to go down the right routes to like any other sort of business division,
yeah.
if you like, to make sure you are surviving, if you like, against brands that are perhaps going direct or whatever.
Sure, and
I mean,
I
because
think it'll be the
obviously
ones that have
Apple,
got really strong both. The ones who've got really strong both, who actually are also digitally savvy as well. I think you know.
yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And what about technology? What's your current thoughts on technology in general? Anything that needs to change at the moment from your experience?
Uh, at the moment, I think it's. I've always used I've mentioned it before. People process technology. I think there's what's happening at the moment is I think that the existing technologies in place that everyone's got are needing to work harder than they've ever done before and prove their worth.
Yeah,
So you know.
yeah,
Um, there'll be a lot of sweating right now on on customer data platforms. Are they really are you
mm,
able to get the right consumer journeys out of them? Understand more about your customer. Are some of
mm,
those nice to haves you have on your website really driving added value? You know, um,
mm,
there'll be I
mm,
mean obviously A/B testing technologies and user experience testings are going to be really important in my view. So a lot of
Mm.
companies have these in place or are looking at new ones. They'll continue.
Yeah.
I think there's a need for
Yeah.
going back to doubling down on digital. You know,
Yeah.
I think there's
Yeah. I
going to
think
be a
so.
lot more focus on the customer data that currently exists, because there's going to be a lot more people who've come online. How much do you know about them? Were they retail? Are they competitors who come? Customers who come to you? Are they offline customers who
Yeah.
started shopping online? There's going to be a real need to
Yeah.
understand what's happening there.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
obviously we know. I think a lot of the things that have been talked about the last few years, whether it's omnichannel inventory improvements or AI
Mm.
or AR, even they're going to continue they're going to continue being important in anyone's mix as they move forward. Um,
Yeah.
if that kind of makes sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, it all goes back to the what you were saying before about almost that last mile thing for me. That's like a marginal gain in there that says you really are trying to, and I'm sure obviously big brands are doing that already. Really focusing in on how do you create a shop experience
Yeah,
on a website
yeah,
ultimately. I don't know whether that will move more and more towards content, like you said, stuff
yeah,
like more and more ways to try and interact directly with the customer, and coming from an angle of being that last mile type touch. So like you said,
yeah,
move some of those people from that would currently maybe even be redundant, but actually their expertise in that gentle
yeah,
part of the last part of the seller then used in that manner. And
yeah.
then obviously technology's then got to support that, so that you're not wasting that resource then by not being able to deliver it
Absolutely.
through the platform in the
Yeah,
right way and so on. So I think from our perspective, we're seeing, most definitely, I've mentioned this a few times, but certainly the fact that we take personalization really seriously, and
mm,
as one of those arrows, if you like, in your quiver, um, that is all about making sure that our team actually work alongside your team,
yeah,
and therefore try and it's almost like you've got an extension of your own team with a bunch of third party experts that are actually driving that area for you. And I think you mentioned earlier about, is the tech necessary? Having tech sat on your site or sat in your
mm,
invoicing, or you're paying for ultimately, um,
mm,
is not really good enough anymore. What we're finding
yeah,
time and time again is that there really is a kind of, and I was just chatting to a guy yesterday actually, who who's also ex Aspinall, by the way. But
okay,
anyway, so his name's James Fernie, and
yes,
he was saying to me that when we were talking to him about like our proposition, that one of the things that really resonated along the same lines as you're talking about was that the fact that you're not tying into long contracts or lots of money up front, um, or high rev share type models, you know.
mm,
And he was saying like all those things to me are just massive red flags, because if you've got to do that, then the one thing it's saying to me is that you don't trust your technology. If you can
mm,
sit on the back of a monthly running contract with a fixed price, or a reasonable kind of rev share model or whatever it might be, and no upfront cost, and you've engineered your product ultimately so it's fast to market, fast to get results, and you're not putting pressure on the retailer to have to stump up cash to see if the results work. He was like,
mm,
that's the way of the future, and making sure that tech is actually delivering for you. I think that's such an important thing to be able to do for a retailer,
mm,
especially at the moment, like you're saying, with all these big changes going on.
yeah.
And so yeah, that's what I found in that particular part of it. But
I think
it's really
I
interesting.
think the other
I
thing
mean,
you'll see actually within all this,
well,
actually, Phil, is that, I
yeah,
think there'll be a lot, as I said, a lot of focus. It goes back to doubling down on digital. Are you looking at the internal processes you've got to make your technologies work really well? You know,
yeah,
is your
100%.
product data and your attribution of
Mm,
products customer
mm,
friendly? Is it
mm,
feeding through? Are
yeah,
you able to feed through that information accurately? How is your navigation? How is your manual? How is your
yeah,
merchandising done? How well does that feed through
mm,
to personalization platforms? How well does that feed through to Google? How far? Because
mm,
obviously, that's obviously a major thing that Google Shopping is going to be a major focus. Whether it's social shopping, all
absolutely.
those areas, it's quite important. And I
Yeah.
think some people spend some time
Oh yeah.
re-looking at those things that they give their
Yeah.
technologies a chance to
Mm,
improve, and then equally, what can they
yeah.
do to, and then look at the data to understand what technologies, what technologies are really driving the additional ROI or additional revenue or additional margin that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something like you say you've had a lot of experience doing over the last years and the brands
Yeah.
that you've been working for. So that's great. So what about just to sort of talk about the future, getting your crystal ball out again? What have you got any sort of predictions from your experience? Any gut feel around what
Okay.
other things are going to happen? Need to be considered and so on.
Yeah, I think it kind of ties into the technology thing to an extent, but I think there's a bit more around that. I do think at a bigger macro level,
Yeah.
with everything that's happening, I still think we've forgotten about sustainability is going to come back with a vengeance, if it isn't already.
Right.
How
Yeah.
and ethics
Yeah.
as well is still there. I think that's going to come even more to the forefront. We've already seen that. You've seen what's happened with Boohoo and obviously sustainability was a discussion that was happening at the end of last year, along with Brexit. So that brings on to the second point. I think you'll see a much more focus on international growth, whether it's going to be Europe or whether it's going to be the US now for companies or other markets. I think that's going to be seen as a natural area of white space that companies will be looking at. I think other things. I think there's going to be I think a much more focus on agile merchandising. If seasonality really just start disappearing, how can you be more agile in how you buy and merchandise your product using technology? I think that's going to be really important. So data layers, just to understand that. Moving away from spreadsheets to real-time technology, merchandisers and buyers would be good. And I think the other thing that's coming out is I think the acceleration of better stock management return software. I think that's going to be really important because there's going to be so much pressure. If there's another second wave of COVID, the pressure on knowing where your stock is, managing it, managing your returns process is super important. From a more crystal ball, the other areas I think it's going to be is you're seeing now this social commerce battlefield going to become more important. Shopping from those channels is becoming a super. You see what's happening there. They're all jockeying for position around that.
What is
and I
that
think
looking like now? Because I'm not really that close to sort of social commerce, right? So what you're talking about, Facebook and things like that,
shopping directly, setting up directly through them and shopping through them without even visiting the website really. And it's just going to be they're jockeying for that position around that. You can see why Google started to do free shopping ads in the US, and that's going to roll out here at some point. And it's all about gaining ground, I think. Other last things I think I guess I've written down here, where I do think there'll be some augmented reality. There'll be some stuff around fit and more technologies coming out now, which will be there to try and, as I said, how are you going to get some of that store experience online? I think was it recently I saw just done one, Clark's. Someone else has done one recently where they're starting to invest in that. I'll remember who it is in a minute. So I think that's going to be a major growth. I also think it'll be really interesting to see how these small B2B businesses, what that's going to mean to the landscape within the e-commerce technology. I mean, Shopify must be having a field day, I'm presuming, right now. And the Shopify marketplace that was just launched in the US, that's going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens there.
What was that?
The Shopify marketplace. So they've built an app. So they're building a marketplace around Shopify. This in the US. It doesn't look very pretty, but it's there at the moment. So I think you're just seeing all these vendors in that area jockeying for business, and they might take, in the coming recession, you never know that these small vendors, as I said, might take market share from other people. You can't discount that D2C growth because it was there beforehand. Those D2C brands who are just coming up. Boohoo wasn't really around several years ago. Allbirds, which was a D2C footwear brand. There's a lot of it's just going to accelerate more, I think. So there we go.
It's certainly exciting times. I mean, the virtual reality side of it, on the AR or the VR, whatever. I mean, that sounds like it feels like a bit of a no-brainer. If they actually got that to be commoditized to a degree that everybody had one like a mobile phone, all of a sudden you'd be putting stuff on and fitting it, and you'd be in the fitting rooms and stuff, right? I don't know how, if they can get that nailed. I'm assuming that's going to be pretty strong. I don't know whether it's already happening.
A lot of that sort of thing there is going to be coming through, I think.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, I mean, thanks very much for that. I mean, in terms of supporting you, David, or getting in touch with you, there's sort of two strands to it, right? I mean, obviously you work independently helping brands, but also you are a very seasoned e-commerce director. So the context really is, if you're looking for a strong, experienced enterprise e-commerce director to run a team and drive things forward, or you're looking for consultancy assistance in like some of the areas that you've been talking about, what's the best way for the guys to get in touch with you?
Well, it'll be LinkedIn. So you'll have to look up David Williams on LinkedIn. That's the main way, really. I do have a company called DHW Digital, which is, but I don't have a website for that at the moment. So should be able to find me. The good-looking 21-year-old. No, I'm joking.
Yeah,
but
of course.
LinkedIn's the best way to do it.
A 21-year-old with 20 years experience. Brilliant. So just finally then, what about one kind of key nugget that you'd love the guys to sort of take away with from what we've talked about today?
Oh, key nugget. Wow.
Don't say double down.
Don't take double down with digital. I think I've said this before actually with someone else, so I'm going to be a bit naughty, but I think if you're in the digital world right now, in an e-commerce business right now, you've probably been worked to death. A lot of focus on you to get things right. I think the main thing for me I've said is it is a period of carpe diem. It's like seize the day. Use this as an opportunity to explain to people in the rest of the business how the business works, so they understand it. The quicker they understand it, the quicker support you'll get for it. Break down the silos, but understand how rest of the people in the business, how they think and how they do things. I spent a long time doing that over time. So I think that element of digital transformation, you've got a very strong part to play in doing that, especially in times like this. Don't retreat to three little acronyms about in paid social and things. Try and contextualize everything that you do to the senior leadership and you'll get their support.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I can really feel the passion that you have for that side of things, breaking down the silos, and it's kind of cultural, right? That what you're talking about is. So
I think you have to when you're sometimes when you're sorry, Phil, when you're in a channel in a business, I set up a business from scratch for Deckers in Europe.
Awesome.
You can't do that without understanding how the rest of the business works. Building relationships, collaborating, but also having context of what you're doing in the scope of the wider business. It's quite important to have that skill set as well as the technical and commercial expertise that you need to do these roles.
Completely, yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much, David. That was great chat, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. It just remains for me to say that if you haven't done so already, please do register at the website at segmentify.com/podcast, and you can pick up all the new and existing podcasts there. We welcome you leaving reviews from any of the podcasts that you listen to, I think on the Apple player, or you can follow us on the Spotify channel as well. And then if you have any questions from any of the talks actually, or you want to be involved in any of in the actual channel itself, and we talk about a topic together, then email me at phil@segmentify.com. And if there's any topics that are kind of really burning topics that you want us to cover, let us know as well. But thanks so much, David, for your time, and everyone for listening.
My pleasure.
I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Yeah, thanks, David.
Put us to the test and let us prove we can drive more revenue for you. Sign up for a completely free proof of concept or split test against your current provider, set up and optimized by our team within a few days at segmentify.com/demo.